Well, thank you so much, Senator Bennet, for sitting down to talk with us today. We know you're busy and appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'd rather talk about this than the other stuff that I'm talking about today.
Well, thank you for that. Well, as you know, Habitat for Humanity is celebrating our 40th anniversary in Metro Denver.
Congratulations.
Thank
it's
you.
Tremendous.
Thank you.
Tremendous.
Thousands of families have been served through the program and through our model. And this year, as we're celebrating those successes, we're also really digging deep into the impact that having a good home has on families and especially on children. And as the former superintendent in Denver and our great senator for the state of Colorado, we know that you care deeply about creating opportunities for future generations. And so today we just really wanted to talk about the connection between housing and education.
It's a huge connection. I mean, if you look at the broader question in our country right now, even in a place like Colorado, which has one of the most dynamic economies on the planet, people still have a very hard time affording health care, higher education, daycare or early childhood education, and housing. And that's a consequence of two things. One, incomes for a lot of people have not gone up even though the economy has grown. And second, stuff costs a lot more than it used to, and housing is one, as you know, there is almost no affordable housing left in the metro area. I mean, for example, when I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, one of the things that I loved about being in that organization was that many teachers could afford to live and own houses or rent apartments in Denver. Today, they can't afford them in Denver, and they can't afford them in Douglas County, Jefferson County. It's just become very expensive in the area. For kids, stable housing is as important as making sure that they've got access to health care and they've got access to a meal. And too many of the kids I knew in Denver didn't know when they went to bed at night where they were going to wake up the next morning. And that makes it very hard to be able to concentrate on your studies. And so I think if we're thinking about really investing in education and giving kids a chance to meet their full potential, making sure they've got safe and secure housing is a big piece of that.
Well, thank you for understanding that, and your experience is spot on. We know that 98% of children growing up in a Habitat home graduate from high school.
Yeah, and so I mean, that's a perfect example of the schools can't solve everything in society, but if we can nail down some of these things, look at that number, 98% compared to, we're doing a lot better than we were, but still too many of our kids aren't getting all the way through.
It's true, and teachers are struggling. And being a big employer like a school district and having an opportunity to have staff local.
And you don't want to be a city where you sort of have a class of people that can afford to live in the city and then everyone else. There are cities in America, I'm not going to mention them, I'm not going to name them, but people with families can't afford to live in those cities, and teachers can't afford to live in those cities. And what happens is there's a hollowing out of the community, and people are raising their kids somewhere else. They're driving long distances to try to get to their jobs, cleaning office buildings or doing whatever it is they do. But what happens is the school district, in these places can be cut in half or cut by 2/3 the number of kids. And when that starts to happen, you get a real downward spiral in terms of the fabric of the community and the district and the ability of the kids that are left to be able to learn. We cannot let that happen to Denver, and that's why these housing issues, and I know Habitat, fortunately, isn't the only group doing this because it's going to take more than one organization, but it's why Habitat has been so critical.
Thank you for that, and your support has always meant a lot to us. What are your thoughts in terms of how do we help to solve this issue?
I think that we've got to be willing to consider and reconsider our the density in our communities. Something you and I were talking about earlier. People sometimes don't like changes in density requirements because that requires changes in people's neighborhoods. And I'm somebody who would be worried about that myself, but if we are going to really figure out how to build enough affordable housing for our community, we're going to have to make some changes in the way we think about that. And I think while it does require change, it's also true that some of the most desirable places on the planet to live are places where people have gone up a little bit higher and there's a little bit more density, and so I'm fortunately no longer in a position to get yelled at over that issue because I'm no longer a local official. I get yelled at about other issues instead, but I do think that's part of it. Here I've been trying to work on evictions as another part of the puzzle, but that is a remedy that is incredibly destructive to children and their education, because when people are evicted, they very often have to go to another school someplace else, and that's terrible for a kid. And by the way, I remember back when I was in the district that we discovered that a lot of the reasons why people were selecting new schools was not because the education was better in the school they went to in some cases, but it was around housing issues. And families were having to move from place to place, and that's not a good reason for a kid to choose a school or to interrupt their education.
Well, we have often found families reporting back to us that the #1 transformational aspect of living in a Habitat home is the stability, and the stability then gets into kids' education.
Yeah. I mean, think about the difference between coming home every night to the same place and the same kitchen table and the same, to do your homework, next to the same. Think about the difference between that and having no idea where you're going to be at the end of the week or at the end of the month. I mean, those of us that have been fortunate, as I have been, never to have that kind of insecurity in their lives, and we take for granted this idea that, well, of course everybody's going to be able to do their work and it's all up to them whether they do it. Well, there are a lot of variabilities in a kid's life, can be, that can intrude on their education. Housing is certainly a huge one.
Well, thank you. Thank
Thanks
you for your
having me.
support and for your
Congratulations
words
on your
this morning.
40th anniversary.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
great.
you very much.